For the record, now I don't remember if you'd stated your name yet. Could you please state your name and spell your first and last name?
Therese DeFazio, capital T-H-E-R-E-S-E, DeFazio, capital D-E, capital F-A-Z-I-O.
And Ms. DeFazio, how are you employed?
I am a third grade teacher at Southport Elementary School.
That's how you're employed right now?
Yes.
And how long have you been so employed?
In Southport, I've been there 14 and a half years.
Were you employed in the, I guess it would be the fall semester of 1998 in that capacity?
Yes, I was.
And was one of your students David Jensen?
Yes, he was.
So he was in third grade at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And what kind of a student was David?
He was an excellent student.
Very bright kid?
Very bright child.
And did you ever come to meet either one of his parents?
Yes, I did.
Which of his parents did you meet?
I met his mother at open house before school started.
And what was your impression of Mrs. Jensen at that point?
She was very nice. She volunteered to help me in the classroom, and I like parents who do that.
So tell us about the volunteering in the classroom, how that came up.
She came up to me at the open house and said, I have a slip for signing in when you come to the open house, and it asks if you're interested in volunteering. And she did sign up and then came over to talk to me about volunteering in school.
And tell us about as much of that conversation as you can remember as you're sitting here today.
Well, she had asked me how she could help. She says, I like to cut things out and correct papers and help any students I can. And I said, oh, that's great. I said, I would love that kind of help. I said, also, how about some help in the computer lab, because we have children who, in third grade, they don't know how to type yet. So I asked her if she could help me with that. And she said no.
Did she say why she couldn't help with that?
Well, she said that she didn't even know how to turn on a computer. But she said, if you open up a program, I could type for you, but I only type about 35 words a minute, she said. And the reason I remember that is because we made a little joke about it.
What was the little joke, if you can recall?
Well, I only type about 35 words a minute, too, and that's hopefully without too many mistakes. That's why I never became a secretary.
Okay. That was the first time you ever spoke to Mrs. Jensen?
I believe so, yes.
As you're sitting here now today, do you remember what her physical appearance was at the time?
She's a very petite woman, and she had blondish hair, short at the time. Very kind, sweet little lady.
Now, and did she then volunteer thereafter in your class?
Yes, she started. School starts at that time. It used to start before Labor Day. And I said, give me a little time to get to know the students, and then we'll start volunteering. So she started about a week or two after Labor Day.
So sometime in early September?
Yes.
And how often would she volunteer? Was it a set time, or was it whenever she could show up?
It was a set time, every Wednesday, from about 9:30 till, or 9 o'clock until about 11.
And did she show up on a regular basis?
Yes, she was very prompt.
And how, was she appropriate in the classroom, or was she of assistance to you in the classroom?
Oh, she was wonderful. She used to do all kinds of wonderful things with the kids.
Can you tell us about some of the things she did with the kids?
She would go and help. I had a student who was very slow and had trouble paying attention, and she'd sit next to him if I asked her to help him. Or she would work helping children with their math, or listen to them read, or just cut and paste things for me.
Did you ever have occasion to speak with Mrs. Jensen during this period of time?
Yes, on Wednesdays at 10:30 every day till 11, the music teacher came in, and so at that time, we would move to a side room that had like a glass partition between our room and this little side room, and we would work in there together and talk.
And did you feel as though you came to know Mrs. Jensen reasonably well during that period of time?
Yes, we used to share a lot of conversations.
Can you give us some examples of the types of things that you and Mrs. Jensen would talk about on Wednesday afternoon and Wednesday mornings between 10:30 and 11?
Well, we both have two boys, but mine are, at that time, they were in college, and one in college and one in high school. And so she had a lot of questions about boys and raising sons, and education and colleges, and a lot of things like that we would talk about.
She would talk to you about colleges?
Yes, she'd say that she knows that her son was very bright and she knew he'd go to college, and she was asking some questions.
About David's college education?
About David's or anything, so she could be prepared as a mother.
And did she ever talk to you about her home life or her husband?
Yes, she did bring that up. After we had gotten to know each other for a while, she said to me, by the way, I want to tell you, I recognize your name. And I said, how do you recognize my name? And she then told me some private things.
Well, can you tell us what those private things were?
She told me that she had been seeing my brother-in-law, who is a psychotherapist, in the same office that my husband is in, and that she was had seen him in the past for marriage counseling.
She indicated she'd seen him for marriage counseling?
Yes.
Did she indicate that she'd seen him for anything other than marriage counseling?
Not that I recall. It was that.
Did she tell you anything about why she felt the need to see a marriage counselor?
She told me, very sheepishly, she told me that she had had an affair, and she was going to marriage counseling to try and save her marriage.
At the time that she was seeing this marriage counselor?
Yes.
Now, how long was it after she'd started volunteering, if you can recall, that you had this conversation with her?
I believe it was towards the end of September. She had been there at least 3 weeks, and so she was feeling more comfortable to talk to me about things.
So after only knowing you for about 3 weeks, she was telling you about the fact that she'd had an affair and she was seeing a marriage counselor?
Well, I take pride in getting to know my parents and trying to talk to them and letting them know I'm always there for them. And I think she felt that she was ready and comfortable enough to talk to me.
Now, did she have any further conversations with you about her home life?
Later on, she did. She started telling me some little things that were bothering her.
What sort of little things did she tell you that were bothering her?
She would say that her husband, since the affair, had been treating her very cautiously, always asking her where she was going, what time she'd be back. He would criticize her verbally.
Did she give you any additional information regarding her home life besides that?
She said he was critical of her being as a mother, even, because I brought up something the end of October, right before conferences, about her son.
What had you brought up near the end of October about her son, if you can remember?
Well, I told her I noticed David was having some facial tics, especially around the eye, and they seemed to be getting worse. So I mentioned that to her, and she was worried that that was going to come up at conferences.
How did she express her concern in that regard?
Well, she just said to me right out, she says, I'm worried about you bringing that up at the conference. And I said, why? And she said, because her husband was very critical of her, and she mentioned about how badly a conference went in second grade.
What did she tell you about the conference in second grade?
She said that at one of the last conference, I believe it was in second grade, her husband sat there very quietly during the conference, and the teacher, I guess, had something she said that was negative. And when they got home, he just yelled at her and criticized her that this problem was all her fault, and just yelled at her.
So this was some information that you had before the third grade conference that you were going to have with the parents, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you have a conference in third grade with both Mark and Julie Jensen regarding their son David?
Yes, on November 18th was our conference.
Tell the jury what you can remember about that conference on November 18th of 1998.
Well, I was cautiously speaking. Every word I chose very carefully when I was speaking, because I did not want to sound too negative. I didn't have anything really negative to say anyway. David is a wonderful student. But when I brought up about the facial tics, I especially watched Mark Jensen's facial expressions as I was telling him about it, and saying that I thought he should see a doctor, David should see a doctor about this, because it is a health issue, a medical problem.
And after the parent-teacher conference, when was the next time that you spoke with Julie Jensen, if you can recall?
The next Wednesday when she came in, because right after that conference we have Thanksgiving break, so I didn't see her until Wednesday, the 25th.
The 25th of
November. Mm-hmm.
And on Wednesday, the November 25th, what, if anything, did you and Julie Jensen speak about?
When we had a chance at about 10:30, we were in the side room, and I asked her, she did not bring it up, but I asked her, how did the conference go? When you got home, did your husband treat you all right? And did you get a chance to call the doctor? And so we talked about that first.
And how did Mrs. Jensen reply to your inquiry?
She said that her husband hardly spoke to her and was very quiet, and that he did, when she asked him several times, finally he said, yes, go call the doctor, and so she called a doctor for an appointment.
Did she say anything else?
She started wringing her hands and was acting extremely nervous, and so she had stopped talking to me like mid-sentence, and I said, what's the matter?
Do you remember what the sentence was that she'd commenced when she stopped speaking mid-sentence?
Not exactly. I don't remember the exact part of the conversation we're having, but she had stopped mid-sentence, and I said, what's the matter?
And how did she reply to that inquiry?
Well, she hesitated. She didn't want to tell me what was on her mind. She said, I don't know if I should be telling you this. And I said, well, when you're ready, you can tell me whatever it is that's bothering you.
And what happened next?
She started to wring her hands again, and she said, I think my husband is going to kill me. And I looked at her and I said, that's a very severe thing to say. I said, you said you think your husband's going to kill you? And she said, yes.
What happened next after that?
I said to her, let's step out of the room and go down to the lounge, the teacher's lounge, where we can talk without anyone hearing us. So we walked down to the lounge.
Had you ever done that before with her?
Walked down to the lounge and talked to her? No.
Because of the nature of the subject matter, you felt it important to get her apart somewhere?
Yes, somewhere where I could speak to her privately.
And were you able to speak to her privately in the teacher's lounge?
Yes.
So tell the jury what happened between you and Mrs. Jensen in the teacher's lounge.
When we got down there, I looked her straight in the eyes and I said, now you said you think your husband is going to kill you. I said, why do you think your husband's going to kill you? What is he doing? She said, he has been turning off his computer or turning it away from me every single time I come into his area by the computer. And so, being suspicious, she said, I was cleaning one day and I went by the computer and saw, when I was dusting, that there was a list of items on a piece of paper. And they were items such as syringes, she said, and drugs, and items like that. And I asked her what she did with that. She says, well, I took it, and I gave it to someone.
What happened next after that?
Well, I said to her, I think if you're afraid how do you think he's going to kill you? And she said, well, that list made her think that maybe he was going to give her some drugs and have maybe drug overdose or something, somehow get her to take some drugs. So I said, well, how would he get you to take drugs? And she says, I don't know, put it in my food or something. So I said, well, what happened this past weekend that made you think especially that he was going to kill you? And she said, well, he was trying to get me to eat, and I wouldn't eat anything he made or drink anything he would try to give me.
Did she indicate to you anything that he was trying to get her to drink?
I don't recall exactly what it was at this point.
So what happened after she made that statement to you?
Well, I was concerned maybe she wasn't eating right. So I asked her, I says, have you been eating? And she says, yes, only things that I have prepared, or I go out and grab something to eat.
Now, you had known her since early September?
Yes.
And you'd seen her every week?
Yes.
About the same time every week?
Yes.
And had you paid careful attention to her?
Yes.
And between the beginning of September of 1998 and this conversation that occurred on November 25th, 1998, did you see any change in Julie Jensen's physical appearance?
Yes, I saw that she was more nervous that day, extremely nervous.
Okay. What about this? Did you have some perception of Julie Jensen's weight or body mass in September and her weight and body mass in November?
She looked about the same. That date in particular, though, she looked quite drawn. Her face looked quite drawn.
As though she were worried or nervous?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Was there any more to that conversation that occurred between you and Mrs. Jensen on November 25th, 1998 that you can now remember?
After hearing what she had said to me, I said to her, I think you need some help. And I told her about Women's Horizons. And I grabbed the telephone book and started to look up Women's Horizons phone number. I said, I have helped other people, and I can help you. Let's get you some help at Women's Horizons, which is a place for abused women and their families.
And did Mrs. Jensen make any statement to you as you were doing this?
She said, oh no, I couldn't do that because I can't leave my boys. And I said, well, they do take children. But she was worried that things would be too messed up for her children going there.
So she indicated the reason. Was there any other reason she indicated why she couldn't go there, or was that pretty much it because of her children?
I would say it was mostly because, as she said, because of her children. But she also said to me that she needed to get things organized so she could do it in a very planned way. She didn't want to just run away and have things a mess. She wanted to have a plan, so she was trying to work on a plan.
When she was describing to you this list that she'd found, did she express a variety of potential suspicions about that list, or was it just one suspicion that she had about why he had this list? Do you remember?
I don't think she ever told me why. Oh yes, she said what she thought was that he was going to use these drugs to give her an overdose. That's the only thing I recall that she said about the list in particular.
When she talked about a drug overdose or tried to give her a drug overdose, did she say anything more about it besides the fact that she thought her husband might be trying to give her a drug overdose, if you can recall? Do we have a clean copy of this?
I know that she mentioned that she had taken the list and she was going to give it to someone.
Do you recall making a statement, about writing or typing out a statement, apparently at 35 words per minute or less, sometime shortly after this, you'd been made aware of the fact that Julie had died?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what your question is.
Do you recall typing out a statement concerning your contact with Julie Jensen sometime after she had died?
Yes.
And at the time that you made that statement, were matters still fresh in your mind?
Yes, they were.
I request this document marked as an exhibit. Thank you, Angie. And Ms. Gabrielle, can you see if you can find another copy so we can provide one to the judge? Okay, well, it doesn't have to be a clean copy, just a copy. Oh, okay. Staple. Well, maybe we better use this because it may be that we're going to need a copy. Your Honor, we don't have another copy of this
Did you
statement.
say you were going to put it on the screen?
I was actually going to show it to her and have her read it first to see if it refreshes her recollection.
Yeah, go ahead. Don't worry.
First, I'm
about
going to show it
Don't
to
worry-
counsel.
Don't worry about it. What?
First, I'm going to show it to defense counsel.
Excellent starting point.
I'm going to have her read it to see if it refreshes her recollection. About this one? Yeah. Well, about anything, but I'm going to ask her to read it.
Judge, I think there's a question. My understanding of the purpose of using this exhibit is to refresh recollection. It should be refresh recollection as to this one particular point, and she should be directed to that portion of the statement.
I think that's fair.
I know how to do that, Your Honor.
Well, you had indicated that you were going to have her read it, and I think his point is just have her read the section in question.
Well, actually, I was going to have her read the entire statement to herself, and then after she's read the entire statement to herself, I was going to ask her if that refreshes her recollection, and then I was going to cover the issue that I wanted her to
She
cover.
probably needs to read only that section that upon which her memory needs refreshment.
I guess she hasn't said whether it would refresh her recollection, but I'm sure Mr. Jambois will do that as well.
I assume so.
Well, I thought I knew how to use this statement, but Mrs. DeFazio, at some point after you'd heard that Julie Jensen had died, what did you do?
After I found out she had died, I spoke to my principal immediately. I sent a message to her that I had to speak to a police officer.
And what happened next?
Sergeant Ratsberg came to school. While someone watched my class, I went down and was interviewed by him at great length.
Now, at some point, you typed out a statement, is that correct?
Yes, that statement was requested by Sergeant Ratsberg.
Was Sergeant Ratsberg present when you typed the statement up, or did you type it up after he'd left?
I typed it up at home, and he asked me to just write like a summary because he had already taken extensive notes, and so had my principal, so he had quite a lot of details.
So at the time that you typed up this statement, were matters still fresh in your mind at that point?
Yes, they were.
Now, if I were to allow you the opportunity to review that statement, might that refresh your recollection as to certain aspects of the conversation that occurred between you and Mrs. Jensen on or about November 25th, 1998?
Probably.
Well, then I'm going to give you the statement, and I'm going to ask that you read it.
There has to be some particular answer she can't recall that it would
I
be
think she
refreshing.
has to indicate that her memory is exhausted. From what, she hasn't stated that she has total exhaustion of memory as to the interview.
Well, Your Honor, if you'll recall, I'd asked this witness questions concerning whether she remembered anything else about the conversation that occurred between her and Julie Jensen with respect to the list, and she indicated that she didn't.
Well, what you're actually asking her is what she put in the list, and that's not appropriate.
No, I'm not.
Well, I think you are when you
I'm
translate
not-
it. Well,
I'm not
no, let's
asking
not
what you
argue
put
about
in
it
the
here. Why don't you ask a different question, and then if at any time where the witness indicates that her memory, that she doesn't recall, and that refreshing her recollection from her statement would assist her, then you may proceed to show her that portion of the statement.
Okay, let's get back to a question that I'd asked you earlier. When I'd asked you if Mrs. Jensen said anything else about what her husband, what suspicions she had about what her husband was trying to do to her when she saw that list. Do you remember that question I put to you?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us now what you can remember about what Mrs. Jensen's suspicions were as a result of having read that list that her husband had left on his day planner.
Well, she thought he was going to give her an overdose. And so as a precaution, she said she took the list and she wrote a note with the list, put it in an envelope and gave it to a neighbor. And then she also said she contacted a police officer friend of hers down at Pleasant Prairie Police Department.
Now, I'm going to show you this document that's been marked as State's Exhibit 31.
She hasn't stated that she doesn't recall.
Okay. Do you recall Mrs. Jensen telling you, when I coaxed her,
Objection, meeting.
Sustained.
do you recall Mrs. Jensen saying anything to you about her husband trying to kill her with a drug overdose and making it look like a suicide?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Tell me what she said about that.
She said that her husband had told her that if she ever tried to get a divorce, he would make sure.
971, 23, 1B.
Well, Your Honor, I'm simply asking the question of the witness about what she remembered, and
This would not be fall into that category. This is not.
I already know what it says.
I'm going to make a more elaborate record on this at the break, if you remind me. But I'm going to overrule your objection, so go ahead.
Tell me what Mrs. Jensen said to you.
She said that she was afraid her husband was going to make it look like a suicide because when she went to counseling, he would always say things that were making her look like she was crazy. And if she tried to get a divorce from him, he would try to take the children away, and she would never see them again.
When she expressed that fear that he would try to take the children away and she would never see them again, did she explain to you why she had this fear that he would take the children away and she would never see them again if she sought a divorce?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking me.
When she, well, why don't we do it this way? I want you to try to close your eyes and think back to the conversation that occurred between you and Mrs. Jensen on November 25th, 1998. Mm-hmm. Just think about it. Bring yourself to the point in the conversation where she's describing to you this list. Play that back in your mind's eye. And once you're done doing that, let me know, and I'll ask you another question.
Okay.
Read that question and answer.
There will be a question as soon as she was done, and she said she was done. So now there's going to be a question. Now, tell the jury, as well as you can possibly remember, as you're sitting here today, exactly what Mrs. Jensen said to you after she disclosed to you that she'd found this list?
Judge, this was asked and answered, and just because she closed her eyes in between to answer the question, ask the question again, doesn't allow it to be asked and answered.
Ma'am, do you recall anything further about the conversation you had with Mrs. Jensen after having thought through it again?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
I recall that she told me that she talked to her sister-in-law, Laura, about this list too, and about her concerns.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you what Mrs. Koster had said to Julie. I'm going to ask you now if there's any if there's anything else that you can remember that Julie told you concerning her fears as a result of having read that list.
No, that's all.
After she told you that she thought her husband might try to kill her with a drug overdose and make it look like a suicide, did she give you any explanation as to why she thought that her husband might try to kill her with a drug overdose and make it look like a suicide?
No, I don't know why. She never told me why he would try to kill her, just that she thought he would.
Did she ever disclose to you or make any, at the time that she was telling you about what Mark Jensen had said during the time that she was seeking marriage counseling, was she making those statements regarding what her husband had said? Was she making those statements to you at the time that she was describing her fears about this list, or was that at some earlier conversation that she'd had with you when she was talking about the marriage counseling? Or do you remember at this point?
When she told me about the counseling, that was an earlier conversation.
Well, let's get back to that earlier conversation. Have you told us, well, what did she tell you about those earlier instances when she had been in marriage counseling with her husband?
She said that he would say things to the counselor that weren't true, that made it look like she was crazy or depressed or just not true things about herself.
Did she describe what any of those untrue statements were?
Just that he said they were that she was depressed and she was crazy.
And she disagreed with that description of herself as being depressed or crazy?
Yes, she did. She disagreed with that.
Now, when she was talking to you about her concerns in this regard, aside from suggesting that she contact Women and Children's Horizons, had you suggested she talk to anybody else?
Well, I wanted to tell my principal, and she said that was okay to do. I also asked her to call the police, and that's when she told me she had already contacted the police.
Did she tell you that she'd spoken to anybody else?
She said that she had a neighbor who she had told, and that this neighbor was trying to help her find a safe place to go to. That was part of her plan, that she was going to, it was someplace down in Illinois, she didn't reveal where, but that he was trying to find her a place that she could hide out in if she needed to.
Did she give any further information about what efforts she made to take care of herself or to assure her own safety or protection during this difficult time?
Well, she took the notes and she put them in an envelope with that, with her own note, saying that if my husband ever kills me, please believe that I did not commit suicide. I would never do that because I love my children. I wouldn't leave my children. And she said she gave that to her neighbor.
So she told you about the note that she'd written?
Yes.
Did she ever show you that note?
No, she said she had already given it to her neighbor.
Did she tell you about what was in the note?
Just what I had said.
Okay. When she talked to you about her husband turning off the computer or changing the screen when she would walk by, did you make any suggestions to her as to what she might be able to do about that?
Yes, I said to her, well, do you know how to go in and check the cache? And you have to remember, back in 1998, I'm sorry, the cache in a Macintosh is where you could go to find out where a person who had used the Macintosh had been. And I'm not IBM knowledgeable at that time, at least I was not. So I said to her, since you have an IBM compatible, there must be something you can go into to go up and check where that person has been.
And how did Mrs. Jensen respond to that suggestion?
She said, I don't know what to do. She says, I don't know that much about computers. She says, I wouldn't know what to do. And I said, well, do you think you could at least try and figure it out? And she said, if he ever caught me checking that, he would be very angry with me and I'd have to put up with a very upset husband.
So she was there on November 25th,
Yes,
and that's when this conversation occurred.
yes,
Did you ever see Julie Jensen alive again?
no,
She was scheduled to be there on December 2nd.
yes,
Did she come on December 2nd?
no.
Did you get any communication from her on or about December 2nd?
Not until I asked David. It was a little after 9, and since she was always prompt, I said, oh, David, is your mother coming today? And he says, oh, I forgot to give you my note.
And he gave you a note at that point?
Yes.
And do you remember what was on the note and who the note was from?
It said it was from Julie. It was printed. It wasn't written in cursive. It was printed. And it said that she was sick and would not be able to come in today. And could David please be allowed to go to his friend Eric Shore's house after school instead of coming home?
And was it common for David to go to Eric Shore's house on Wednesday afternoon or not?
No, but not every Wednesday, no. But if ever a child has to go instead of on the bus or instead of being picked up by their parents, if they're going to go somewhere else, they have to have a written permission from the parent, otherwise they can't go. If he ever went to, your question was though, if it was usual for him to ever go to Eric's house on a Wednesday, no. That was the first time I'd ever gotten a note asking if he could go to Eric's on a Wednesday.
And was that note signed by anybody?
I'm not sure if I remember it was signed.
Did you have the impression that that note came from Julie Jensen or that it came from somebody else?
I remember reading it over a couple of times, and I got the impression it was from her because I turned to David and said, oh, your mother's sick. And he said, yes, she is. So I assumed then she had written that note.
Did David tell you anything more about his mother besides the fact that she was sick?
Yes, he said she was coughing really very badly.
Now, David was 8 years old at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And when he was describing this to you, was he just telling you about it, or was he also trying to demonstrate what his mother was doing, or don't you remember?
He was kind of shy at that age, and so he just said she was coughing, and I had to almost, say to him, well, coughing really hard, David, or just a little cough? And he said, coughing really hard, but he didn't demonstrate at that point.
Did he tell you whether or not his mother was able to get out of bed?
No, he said she could not get out of bed. She was not getting out of bed that day at all. And he wasn't allowed to go in and see her either, he told me. She was sick.
Did he tell you who told him he couldn't go in to see her?
Well, his father said, don't bother your mother, he said.
Did David have any friends? Well, you'd mentioned something about Eric Schur.
Yes.
Was Eric Schur also in David's class?
Yes, he was.
Were Eric Schur and David friends?
Yes.
At any time, did you ever talk to Eric Schur about Mrs. Jensen?
I did not talk to Eric. I talked to his mother, Laura Schur.
You indicated that Julie, sometime in the third week of September, had told you about this affair she'd had a number of years earlier.
Yes, she did.
Did she ever describe to you how her husband, Mark, had reacted to that affair?
Yes, I said earlier that she was being scrutinized by him for every place she went, what she did, and he also said that I recall her saying she wanted to get a job, and he said, no, I don't want you going out getting a job.
Did she ever make any statement to you about how he never forgave her for that affair?
Oh, yes. She said he never forgave her for that. He held that as a terrible, terrible thing she had done. He would never, ever forgive her.
At some point after Julie's death, did you ever have a conversation with David about that?
Yes. He wasn't at the wake, and then when he came, he wasn't visible for me to see him at the wake, so I couldn't speak to him then. When he came back to school a few days later, I asked our counselor what I should do when he came back. She spoke to my class about how not to question him too much, and she also said to me, don't question him too much. But at one point, when I went up to him and said, I feel very sorry for your loss, I remember asking him...
Who would object to any more hearsay, David?
We're going to take a break. Please don't talk about the case during the break. Usual. Did you want to respond, Mr. Janowitz?
Well, Your Honor, first of all, I am seeking to elicit this testimony in order to establish the truth of the matter asserted, and I recognize that I am requesting hearsay, but I would point out that this witness is...
What do you expect the answer to be, by the way?
I expect that...
Well, let me do this. Let me ask the witness to answer.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Let's have an offer of proof on it.
After you offered your sympathies to David, what, if anything, did David say to you?
He said, I wanted to see my mother when I came home from school on Thursday, and my father wouldn't allow me to go in to see her. He made me go take Dougie out with the dog for a walk at 4 o'clock. It was after 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
And, Your Honor, that's, as I recall, it's consistent with the statement that Mark Jensen made to Aaron Dillard, that when he got home, he wouldn't let the children go in to see her. He made them stay out in the driveway while he went in, as though he were to confirm her condition.
I thought that I had read that in another source besides Mr. Dillard,
There was
something attributed to the accused.
There was. Mr. Nearing had indicated, you didn't read it, you heard Mr. Nearing testify.
Oh, but I thought I had read this, perhaps in Detective Ratsberg's examination.
I believe it was in Detective Ratsberg's examination as well, that the defendant had told Detective Ratsberg that he didn't let the kids, that he had a feeling, or, well, I don't know if now I don't remember if it was Detective Ratsberg they said this to, or Mr. Nearing. I know he told Mr. Nearing he had this feeling, so he made the kids wait out in the driveway while he went in. And I believe that he told Detective Ratsberg, and I don't have the interview transcript here in front of me, I believe he told Detective Ratsberg that he made the kids wait in the driveway while he was inside.
Let's do this. After we talk about this subject a little bit more, why don't you check to see if it's, because I would be virtually certain I read this somewhere myself. It goes to exception number 24. Other guarantees of truthfulness.
How does it has to have inherent truthfulness to it? Otherwise, it doesn't apply. It can't be.
Well, and of course, I guess I'm jumping past the confrontation issue too.
Well, Your Honor, as far as the confrontation issue, David Jensen has been subpoenaed by the prosecution, and he is going to be called as a witness in this case, and he will be asked about this. I have no idea what his answer is going to be, because clearly he's been in the custody of the defendant since this case commenced. So we've not had an opportunity to interview David Jensen, but we did have an opportunity to interview the defendant, and the defendant indicated that he required the children to remain out. In my recollection is, and I'm having Ms. Gabrielle go through the interview right now with Detective Ratsberg, and actually Detective Ratsberg is here.
Well, here, let's not talk about it anymore. And the reason I say that is because if it is, there's a confrontation issue too.
Well, not if we're going to produce the witness. We're going to produce David Jensen.
But he has to be.
If we produce the witness, Your Honor, and then David Jensen says, I have no recollection of this, that he's still been produced,
Yeah,
and that satisfies confrontation.
Judge, you still have hearsay rules. And
that's why I want to wait with this, because if it turns out that this is in a statement, a recorded, physically videotaped statement of the accused, then I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting bogged down about it.
Well, it's being, let's say the method of its telling will be far exaggerated and prejudicial, and I would appreciate being bogged down because it's a hearsay rule. It should not come in.
That's why I want to wait until we have the whole picture, and then we'll deal with it.
Well, Your Honor, I've got the transcript right here. Would you like me to read it to you?
Please do.
Page 186, counsel. Line 1, question by Detective Berg. What did you do with the kids when you got home that day? I mean, you walk in the door. Answer, we all went straight for the bedroom. Question, all three of you? Answer, I kept them at the door. Question, okay, you? Answer, I take that back. I tried to distract the kids. I purposely tried to distract the kids. David, take the dog out. I went in there and checked, and by the time the kids came back into the house, I was on the phone with 911. Answer, okay, so question, okay, so you were kind of prepared for something to happen. Answer, not really, but I really didn't know what to expect. Question, okay, so you didn't know what to expect, but you kind of thought. Answer, I thought there might have been an even money chance that she was gone. And if she wasn't, I couldn't take it anymore, and I was going to call somebody. Question, okay, yeah, David was prepared for an ambulance coming that night. So that's the nature of the transcript.
Sounds like it scores with what the witness is saying.
Well, I wanted to see my mom. He was missing from this recitation, and also Mr. Jamboys has told me that he, at this stage, although I've asked that this portion of the transcript be admitted, at this point I've not heard, the last I heard from the prosecution, they were not admitting this part of the statement.
Well, it's available. That's the bottom line. And I think you're probably right. I think there is a case along the lines you suggest that number 24 is not to be considered by weighing other evidence, which is corroborative. But let's just say I feel more liberated, and I'll have to research this more thoroughly because I'm not sure that's a controlling case.
Well, it has to have inherent, don't have the statute in front of me, but it's guarantees of trustworthiness similar to the other 23 exceptions.
And in fact, it could be, I suppose it has to be examined a little more carefully, but this may be, when you're talking about an 8-year-old child and the death of mother, and the first instance when he has contact with his teacher afterwards, it strikes me that it may be in the category of an excited utterance, where the key is spontaneity. So we'll take it up in a few minutes. In the meantime, I wanted to address the other issue that I put on hold, which was your objection that you hadn't gotten prior notice of the statement of the accused.
And that went in a different direction than I anticipated, that there's ultimately no issue on that. There was one thing I did want to raise, Judge, on the record, and I'm not asking that, I don't know what could be done about it, but the statement during the cross-examination of Mr. Naring that the court made about how police usually don't provide assertions is somewhat prejudicial to the defense, because I think that's something that has happened quite a bit in this case. I think it happens a lot in all cases. I think when police go to talk to somebody and they want to push them to make additional statements or be more willing to volunteer things against the potential suspect, that they do say, well, so-and-so said, and in this case, Detective Ratzberg lied to Mr. Jensen for hours. I mean, he told lies over and over again. So, I mean, he will use other tactics to induce people to make statements or improve their statements, and the court's suggesting to the jury that police officers usually just ask questions and people just usually give answers and they don't provide them with information is contrary, at least to my experience, and I wanted to raise that concern.
Well, Your Honor, first of all, I'd point out that there's a difference between interviewing David Naring and interrogating Mr. Jensen. And there's nothing improper about law enforcement officers lying to suspects during the course of interrogations. And it should be noted, the record here is that Mr. Jensen returned the favor and lied repeatedly to Detective Ratzberg, and which, by the way, is not an unusual occurrence either in police interrogations of a murder suspect. But the question is, what about the interview between Detective Ratzberg and Mr. Naring? And what Mr. Naring said was that, well, no, he actually thought Detective Ratzberg was being quite objective. In any event, I'm not sure what the issue is. What is it that counsel wants?
I think he's made a legitimate point. I think I did make an observation in front of the jury about the police ordinarily just asking questions and not making representations about people.
Which is consistent with what Mr. Naring said. But and let's say this. What is the point? What are we supposed to do about it?
I don't know. That is the next question. What do you want me to do about it?
Well, maybe I'll think about that part over the break. And what I ended up deciding not to go in specifically with Mr. Naring about, because it would open a different can of worms for me, is that Detective Ratzberg had told him, falsely in my view, that during the interview with Mr. Jensen had admitted making up the photos that were the subject of the harassment. And so he had, I mean, that's reflected in Mr. Naring's statement. So there was additional information given, and Mr. Naring's statement says something like, I did not know that Mark Jensen was responsible for the photos or something like that. So there was some information being floated to him that I think could affect his bias, I guess.
Well, I don't know what, because counsel indicated he intentionally chose not to pursue that line of questioning with Mr. Naring. And so once again, I'm at a loss as to what the purpose is in raising this.
Well,
what is it that counsel wants?
here. Let's take the break let's try to hold it to 7 minutes.
7 minutes.
All right, go nuts. 9. And we'll start again at 10:02.
3.
And I will think about, I'm not sure I agree with you, Mr. Albee, but I think it may be that you're correct in that I was in error in what I did. And if so, what you want done about it. All right.